Rain streaked long trails across the windows of the Carrington estate, a proud fortress of glass and stone perched on a hilltop, overlooking the city glittering with lights. Wind howled through the towering window frames, as if trying to tell a story about the loneliness of this place. Inside, Amara Reed stood in the vast hallway, adjusting the worn sweater whose cuffs had faded with time. Her sneakers squeaked faintly against the cold marble floor, the small sound echoing through the stillness. At 26, Amara carried a quiet strength, her dark eyes, deep and tired, yet unwavering, as though life had taught her to keep going no matter the weight she bore. This new job, providing daily assistance to Elliot Carrington, the tech billionaire who had survived a helicopter crash 3 months prior, was her chance to pay for her mother's hospital bills and care for her 5-year-old son, Micah. The housekeeper, a frail elderly man named Harold with wispy white hair, led her down long stone-tiled corridors, crystal chandeliers casting flickers of light across the floor. "He's difficult," Harold said in a low, cautious voice, as though sharing a secret. "Don't expect warmth. Just do your job and stay quiet." He stopped in front of a finely carved oak door, gave it 2 gentle knocks, then pushed it open. Inside, the study was cloaked in dim lighting, illuminated only by an antique desk lamp and the crackling glow of the fireplace. The scent of old wood and leather mingled in the air, creating an atmosphere both cozy and stifling. Elliot Carrington sat in a black leather armchair, his left arm resting immobile in a sling, his shoulder slightly slumped from the lingering injury. At 35, he was already a legend in tech, founder of Carrington Technologies, whose artificial intelligence was reshaping the world. His face was sharply defined, chiseled like it had been sculpted from stone, but the shadows beneath his eyes and faint lines on his forehead hinted at prolonged pain. He wore a crisp white shirt, but the sleeves were sloppily rolled up, as if he no longer cared about appearances. His eyes were glued to the tablet in his hand, fingers swiping across the screen with an almost obsessive focus. Amara stepped in and stopped a few feet away, inhaling deeply to steady her voice. "Mr. Carrington, I'm Amara Reed. I'll be assisting you with your daily routines." Her voice was calm, professional, laced with a warmth she hoped would soften the tension in the room. Elliot didn't look up. He waved his hand, a brief, commanding gesture, as if she were no more than a shadow in the room. "Do your job. Don't disturb me." His voice was ice, each word delivered like a non-negotiable order. He kept scrolling, as if her presence wasn't worth acknowledging. Amara nodded, betraying no emotion. She was used to this kind of treatment from clients at her previous cleaning jobs, from people who looked right through her. But something about Elliot made her pause a beat longer. It wasn't the arrogance or the coldness, it was his eyes. For one fleeting moment, when he thought no one was watching, she caught a glimpse of something in his deep blue gaze. Desperation, like a man drowning in darkness, unsure how to reach the light. She began her work, quietly tidying the room. She gathered scattered papers from the desk, neatly organized thick stacks of tech documents on the bookshelf. Her eyes swept over the towering shelves, lined with books on artificial intelligence, economics, and a few faded photos in silver frames. One showed an elderly woman with gray hair and a gentle smile standing beside a young boy, likely Elliot as a child. Amara didn't linger, but she couldn't help wondering, who was that woman? And why was the photo covered in a thin layer of dust? She moved to the corner of the room, wiping the wooden table clean, careful not to spill the half-empty coffee mug beside it. Elliot still didn't look at her, but she could feel his gaze flick toward her now and then. When she bent to pick up a book that had fallen to the floor, she heard him clear his throat as if to speak, but he said nothing. Amara didn't push. She stood, carried the tray of items out of the room, but just before exiting, she glanced back one more time. He was still sitting there, unmoving, the glow of the tablet screen lighting up his face, but his eyes now seemed distant, staring into nothing, lost. She closed the door softly, her heart weighed down. This man wasn't just broken from a crash. There was something deeper, a wound she couldn't yet understand. But Amara knew from this day forward, her job wasn't just about cleaning or caregiving. She would have to find a way through the wall of ice Elliot had built, not for him, but because she believed that everyone, no matter how far gone, deserved to be seen in the light. You're watching Soul Stories, where every story whispers of love, healing, and hope. Let us know which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and be a part of our journey. Now stay with us. The story is just beginning. The Carrington estate was so quiet in the early morning that Amara could hear the gentle tapping of rain against the windows and the steady rhythm of her own breath. On her third day of work, she had grown accustomed to the mansion's vast yet cold atmosphere, with its endless hallways and lavish rooms that lacked warmth. Her job assisting Elliot Carrington, a man who was both a tech billionaire and a reluctant patient, turned out to be more than just cleaning or managing his medications. It was a test of patience, a challenge of engaging with someone who seemed to have built an entire fortress to shut the world out. Elliot was a challenge, just as Harold, the housekeeper, had warned. He refused all assistance beyond the bare minimum, and even then, only on his own terms. That morning, when Amara entered the dining room carrying a breakfast tray, an omelet, toast, and a glass of orange juice, she offered to help him change shirts, as his left arm was still in a sling and mobility was limited. Elliot, seated at the head of the table with his eyes fixed on his phone, looked up immediately, a flash of irritation lighting up his piercing blue eyes. "I don't need you to feed me or wipe my sweat," he snapped, his voice sharp as a blade, every word delivered like a reminder of where she stood. "Just be here and don't piss me off." Amara stood still, tray in hand, her expression unmoved. She didn't flinch at his tone, didn't try to placate him with false charm, nor did she respond with the anger others might have. She simply gave a small nod, set the tray down carefully, and replied, "I understand, sir." Her voice was calm, almost neutral, but carried the quiet strength she had honed through years of single motherhood and countless sleepless nights at her mother's bedside. She turned away and resumed her routine, preparing medications according to the doctor's schedule, tidying the study where Elliot spent long hours, and ensuring the kitchen remained ready for any sudden requests. But while she worked, she observed him not with curiosity, but with a quiet attentiveness, the kind she'd learned from raising her son Micah. She noticed the subtle moments Elliot thought no one saw, the way he clenched his jaw when pain flared in his shoulder, how his hand tightened into a fist when he tried to lift his injured arm, or the distant look in his eyes when he stared out the window, as if searching for something long lost. Elliot's loneliness wasn't something he expressed, it was something that lingered, like an invisible wall pushing everyone away. Harold rarely spoke to him beyond what was required. The rest of the staff, from the chef to the gardener, kept their distance, as though afraid to offend the master of the house. Even Clara, his fiancée, whom Amara had only heard mentioned by Harold, didn't seem to visit often. Amara wondered, how could a man who had everything choose to live in such isolation? On the fourth night, something shifted, if only for a fleeting moment. Amara was reviewing her checklist in the kitchen when she heard a noise from Elliot's bedroom, a soft thud, like something had fallen. She knocked, got no response, but her instincts told her to check. She opened the door to find the bedside lamp casting a dim glow across Elliot's face. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, sweat beading his forehead. His deep blue silk pajama top hung loosely off his right shoulder. The left one was bare. The sling askew, he had clearly tried and failed to dress himself. The pain etched into his features was unmistakable. His lips were tightly pressed, and his right hand trembled slightly as he tried to hold the fabric. Amara stepped in without a word. She picked up the pillow that had fallen to the floor and placed it back on the bed, then quietly approached him. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't show pity. She simply took the shirt, slid it over his left shoulder with careful yet confident movements, making sure not to touch the wound. Her actions carried no sentimentality, no condescension, only quiet dignity, the kind that speaks of respect without saying a word. When she fastened the last button, the room fell into silence, broken only by the sound of rain outside. Then Elliot spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, almost as if it wasn't meant for her. "You didn't ask how I'm feeling." Amara paused, her fingers still on the edge of his shirt. She looked up and met his eyes directly, unwavering. "Because I figured no one's ever really asked you that, sir," she replied, her voice soft but firm, as if stating something obvious. Her words landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending subtle ripples through the quiet. Elliot didn't respond, But for the first time, his eyes rested on her, longer, deeper, as if trying to understand something he couldn't name. In that moment, Amara sensed a small crack in his icy facade, not surrender, but a flicker of light breaking through. She turned and left the room, but her heart was beating faster. She knew then, every step she took in this house from now on would be part of a journey to reach the real man hidden behind the walls he'd built. On Saturday morning, rare sunlight broke through the gray clouds, casting pale beams across the walnut dining table in the Carrington Estate's formal dining room. Amara was quietly polishing the crystal glasses in the corner, her hands moving with practiced ease, but her eyes remained alert to every detail around her. After a week of working for Elliot Carrington, she had learned that caution wasn't just a skill, it was a survival instinct in this house full of unspoken secrets. The dining room doors swung open, and Clara Langley entered, bringing with her a gust of confidence and power. Elliot's fiancée, a renowned lawyer, looked like someone who had stepped out of a fashion magazine. Her golden hair curled into perfect waves, her emerald green fitted dress hugged her slender frame, and her smile, sharp and flawlessly rehearsed, could easily make anyone believe her. But from the corner of the room, Amara noticed something. That smile never reached Clara's eyes. "Elliot, darling," Clara cooed, her voice sweet but edged like velvet over steel. She placed a thick folder in front of Elliot, who sat at the head of the table, his left arm still in a sling, his eyes tired yet wary. "You need to sign this, just a precaution to protect your assets in case of unforeseen events." She emphasized the word unforeseen, tilting her head with a faux concerned expression. Elliot looked up from his tablet, his brow tightening slightly. "What kind of paperwork?" His voice was low, laced with suspicion, yet he reached for the folder and flipped through the first few pages. His fingers moved slowly, thoughtfully, but his body remained tense, the toll of pain and helplessness still present. Clara sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his good arm, a gesture meant to seem affectionate, but carried a possessive undertone. "Just financial authorization, so I can manage a few things if you have another episode. After the accident, you know, we have to be more careful." She smiled, her eyes briefly scanning him, as if calculating his reaction. From her corner, Amara stood still, dishcloth in hand, feeling a chill run down her spine. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but something in Clara's sweet voice felt off, too polished, too deliberate. When Clara excused herself to answer a phone call and left the room, leaving the folder on the table, Amara moved in to clear the cold teacups. She hadn't intended to look, but her eyes inadvertently caught the top page, and the printed words made her freeze. "Permanent financial power of attorney," and "transfer of asset control in the event of incapacitation." Amara's heart pounded. She knew she wasn't allowed to read the document, knew that crossing that line could cost her the job, but her instincts, the same ones that had helped her survive years of hardship, screamed that this wasn't harmless paperwork. These weren't just procedural terms, they smelled of manipulation. Silently, she set down the teacup, her eyes drifting to Elliot, still reading, his fingers tapping the table as if wrestling with something internal. The feeling of unease lingered all day. Amara moved through her usual tasks, preparing lunch, sorting medications, dusting the picture frames in the study, but her mind kept circling back to the folder. She reminded herself she had no right to interfere, that she was just the help. But the memory of her mother, motionless in a hospital bed, the result of others' reckless decisions, kept her from staying silent. The next morning, the atmosphere in the dining room was heavier. Clara had returned, this time dressed in a sleek gray suit, her hair tied in a high ponytail, and her smile brighter, as if she were certain of her victory. Elliot sat in the same spot, the folder open before him, a fountain pen resting beside it. He picked up the pen, his fingers moving slowly, clearly torn. Clara stood beside him, one hand lightly on his shoulder, her smile never wavering. "Today's a good day to get this done, darling," she said, her voice soft, but carrying undeniable pressure. Amara entered the room with a tray of water and lemon slices, just part of her daily routine. She set the tray on a side table a few steps away, immediately sensing the tension in the air. She knew her time was short. If she said nothing, Elliot would sign and she would forever regret her silence. If she spoke, she might lose everything: this job, the ability to pay her mother's hospital bills, Micah's future. But she couldn't turn away from herself. Taking a deep breath, she stepped closer to the table, just close enough so her words would carry only between her and Elliot. She whispered, her voice low enough that Clara wouldn't hear. "Don't sign it, sir." Elliot's head snapped up, the pen frozen midair. His piercing blue eyes locked onto Amara, surprised, sharp, trying to decipher what she meant. Clara beside him stiffened. The smile on her face froze for a split second before she recovered. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her tone light but laced with warning. Amara didn't look at Clara. Her gaze remained on Elliot, unwavering, even as her heart pounded. She offered no explanation, no excuse, just stood there, steady and silent. Elliot slowly lowered the pen, his eyes still fixed on her. "What did you say?" His voice was low, not a command this time, but a question, laced with curiosity and a focus she hadn't seen before. Amara took another breath, keeping her voice steady. "I said, sir, don't sign it." She emphasized each word, not raising her voice but making sure he understood this was not a suggestion. The air in the Carrington Estates dining room was tight as a drawn wire. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm, but it couldn't soften the sharp silence that hung in the room. Elliot held the fountain pen suspended in midair, his piercing blue gaze locked onto Amara Reed. Her words, "Don't sign it, sir," were like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples that would not be stopped. His fingers tightened around the pen, as though he were gripping a decision that could change everything. Clara, standing beside Elliot, whipped her head around. Her bright brown eyes flashed with a cold, cutting anger. But in a heartbeat, she regained composure, lips curling into that perfect, practiced smile. "She's just the help, Elliot," Clara said, her voice sweet but dripping with thinly veiled contempt. "What does she know?" She tilted her head, her eyes sweeping over Amara like she were no more than an obstacle, not even worth the trouble of removing. Amara remained still, tray of water still in her hands, her gaze steady and unflinching. She didn't respond to Clara. She didn't defend herself or apologize. She simply looked at Elliot, her dark eyes filled with quiet resolve. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her expression stayed calm, as if she had spoken a casual observation rather than a warning that could cost her her job or more. Elliot didn't respond immediately. Slowly, he set the pen down on the table. The soft click of metal against wood sounded loud in the silence. He pushed the folder aside, not hastily, but decisively, as if he'd made a choice he didn't yet fully understand. "Call the legal team," he said, his voice low and cold, eyes fixed not on Clara, but on the space ahead of him. "I want this entire document reviewed. Now!" Clara froze. The smile faltered on her face for the briefest moment. "Elliot, darling, there's no need to escalate," she began, her voice still smooth but tinged with urgency. She placed a manicured hand on his shoulder, the diamond on her finger catching the light. "It's just a precaution. After the accident, I just want to be sure." "That's enough," Elliot cut her off, his tone sharp as a blade. He shrugged her hand off his shoulder, eyes still on the document. "I said have it reviewed. If it's as harmless as you say, there's nothing to worry about, right?" Clara opened her mouth, ready to counter, but then closed it, lips pressed into a thin line. She shot Amara a glance sharp enough to pierce through steel, but Amara simply lowered her gaze and set the tray down on a side table, as though oblivious to the storm now brewing around her. Clara turned back, offering a tight smile. "Of course, darling, if that's what you want." She left the room, her footsteps brisk, the click of her heels echoing furiously on the marble floor. Amara began to clean up, tray in hand, heading for the door, but she could still feel Elliot's gaze on her. She didn't turn around. She didn't want to face him just yet. She knew she had crossed a line. A maid had no business interfering in her employer's private affairs, especially not those of a billionaire like Elliot Carrington. But she also knew that if she had stayed silent, she wouldn't be able to live with herself. That afternoon, the Carrington Technologies legal team arrived, men in dark suits with stern expressions and leather briefcases. They convened in the private conference room, joined only by Elliot and a few trusted advisors. Amara carried on with her duties, dusting, preparing tea, arranging medication, but caught murmurs in the hallway. Words like authorization, assets, and high risk slipped through the cracks of the door. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the atmosphere of the mansion had changed as if a storm was gathering strength. Later that evening, when Amara brought a tray of light snacks to the study, she found Elliot sitting alone. The file lay open in front of him, but he wasn't reading. His eyes were fixed on the window, where the city lights flickered beneath a black sky. The lawyers had gone. The room was quiet, broken only by the gentle crackling of the fire. Amara placed the tray on the table and turned to leave when his voice stopped her. "What do you know about that file?" he asked. His voice was calm, clear, not accusatory, just sharp with curiosity. Amara paused, her hand on the doorknob. She took a breath, choosing her words. "I don't know much, sir," she replied steadily. "I just saw a few lines while cleaning. Permanent financial power of attorney. Transfer of control. It didn't seem like something meant to protect you." Elliot turned his head, his eyes locked onto hers, not cold or distant like before, but focused, serious, and something else almost grateful. "The legal team confirmed it," he said quietly. "If I'd signed, Clara would have had full control of nearly all my assets in the event of another coma. No reversal clause, no restrictions." Amara didn't reply. She simply gave a small nod. A chill passed through her, not from fear, but the weight of knowing she had been right. But truth, she knew, always came with a price. Clara returned late that evening, wearing the carefully composed expression of someone preparing for damage control. She entered the study where Elliot still sat and began her defense before he could speak. "Elliot, I swear, I was only trying to protect you," she said, her voice trembling, eyes glassy with what might have been rehearsed tears. "After the accident, I was scared. The lawyers said this was the safest—" "Don't!" Elliot interrupted, his tone cold as ice. "I don't want to hear another excuse." He stood slowly with the caution of someone still healing, but stood tall. His eyes met hers directly. "You were planning to take everything I have. Don't pretend it was for me." Clara opened her mouth, but no words came. She turned toward Amara, who was standing quietly in the corner, preparing to leave. "You!" Clara hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "What did you say to him? Who do you think you are, interfering in our affairs?" Amara didn't respond. She met Clara's gaze without flinching, but without defiance either. Elliot spoke before Clara could go further. "She did what none of you ever did," he said, his voice calm but firm. "She saved me from something I thought was safe." His words cut deeper than any accusation. Clara stood frozen, lips pressed tight, then turned and stormed out, the echo of her heels ringing with fury. Amara lowered her head and moved toward the door, but Elliot called her back. "Amara," he said her name, spoken for the first time, his voice softer now, almost grateful. "Thank you." She nodded, saying nothing, and stepped out of the room. But as the door closed behind her, her heart thudded, not with fear, but the realization that she had stepped into something dangerous. Her whisper hadn't just fractured Clara's plan, it had changed the way Elliot looked at her, and perhaps the way he looked at the world. Where that would lead her, she didn't know. But one thing was certain. From now on, every step she took in this house would require more than just courage. In the days that followed the power of attorney incident, the air inside the Carrington estate felt ever so slightly lighter. Elliot began to notice Amara not with suspicion or indifference, but with a quiet curiosity. He wasn't drawn to her appearance, though Amara possessed a quiet, natural beauty. Thick black curls usually tied up for convenience, deep dark eyes that held unshakable resilience, and a rare but warm smile that could chase the cold out of any room. What caught Elliot's attention was the way she lived an unusual balance of tireless work and a kind of optimism he couldn't comprehend. While he, armed with all the wealth and power in the world, saw life as a series of calculated moves, Amara somehow managed to find light in the smallest things. She moved through her days with steady rhythm, morning cleaning, meal preparation, organizing Elliot's medication, midday checking off task lists and occasionally answering his short questions. Afternoons were for the hospital where her mother, Grace, was staying. She never complained, never showed fatigue, though Elliot sometimes caught her standing silently in the kitchen corner, gripping the counter's edge, taking a deep breath to gather herself again. He found himself wondering, how could someone like her, carrying the weight of family and a young son, still smile while polishing a glass or tying Micah's shoes before school? On a gray, rainy Tuesday afternoon, the city was veiled in a curtain of drizzle, the sound of water dripping steadily on the mansion's roof. Elliot, seated in his study with a company report in hand, found himself unsettled. He couldn't focus, his gaze drifting to the rain-smeared window pane. Amara had left over an hour ago, as she always did, to visit the hospital. Ever since her quiet warning about the document standing there, fearless, not asking for praise, she'd become an enigma. And for the first time in years, Elliot found himself needing to understand someone. He stood up and called for James, his private driver, a quiet man in his 50s. "Take me to St. Mary's Hospital," he said simply. James didn't ask questions. The black Bentley rolled through the rain, tires whispering over slick asphalt. St. Mary's Hospital sat on the outskirts of the city, a worn but well-kept building with long, antiseptic-smelling corridors. Elliot wore a baseball cap to avoid recognition as he made his way to the critical care unit, where Grace was being treated. He didn't intend to speak to Amara, only to see her in her own world. From the hallway, through the glass window of the hospital room, he saw her. Amara sat beside her mother's bed, their hands intertwined, her slender fingers wrapped gently around Grace's unmoving ones. She was speaking, her voice soft, almost melodic, even though no one was answering. "Micah drew another picture at school today, Mama," she said, smiling, her eyes lighting up at the mention of her son. "He drew a spaceship, said he'll take you to Mars when you wake up. I told him you'd probably like the moon better, it's a little closer." She laughed a gentle, aching sound and brushed a lock of silver hair from her mother's forehead. "You have to wake up to see it, okay? I promised him I'd bring it to you." Elliot stood there just beyond the glass, and something tightened in his chest. He wasn't familiar with this feeling, jealousy, not for money or status, but for a moment he had never had. He'd had it all, mansions, a company, fame, but no one had ever sat beside him, held his hand, and told little stories just to make him feel loved. His mother, the only person who once did that, had left him long ago. Since then, his world had been filled with deals, power, and mistrust. He turned away before Amara could see him, walking briskly back to the car, the rain soaking into his coat. During the drive home, he sat in silence, staring out the window, mind spinning with images of her smile, her voice, and that quiet strength he couldn't seem to make sense of. How does someone who has nothing but hope still manage to give so much? That evening, Amara returned to the estate to finish her shift. She stepped into the kitchen and was surprised to find Elliot there, seated at the small staff table, a cup of coffee in hand, his gaze distant. "Sir, do you need something?" she asked, her tone still professional, but edged with surprise. Elliot shook his head, fingers tapping lightly on the ceramic cup. "I just wanted to sit here for a while." He looked at her, his eyes no longer cold, but softer, though still hard to read. "Do you ever get tired, Amara? With everything you do?" She paused, cloth in hand, caught off guard by the honesty in his voice. Then, for the first time, she allowed herself to answer truthfully. "Of course, sir, I do." She smiled a small, sincere smile. "But then I think of Micah, of my mother. They need me. And I think if I stop, who will keep going for them?" She looked down, still smiling. "Besides the little moments when Micah laughs, or when my mother squeezes my hand, even just a little, those are worth more than all the tiredness." Elliot didn't respond right away. He looked at her like he was trying to memorize her words. Then he gave a slight nod, eyes drifting back to his coffee. "You're lucky," he said, voice low, almost a whisper, "to have something to fight for." Amara didn't know what to say. She turned back to her work, wiping down the counter, but she could feel his eyes still on her. In that small kitchen with rain tapping against the windows, something had quietly shifted. Not a promise, not a commitment, but a connection. A flicker of warmth lit in the dark. And for the first time, Elliot felt something he hadn't in years. That maybe, just maybe, there were still things in this world that money could never buy. like the laughter of a woman who fought every day for the people she loved. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. Friday morning dawned unusually clear above the Carrington estate. Sunlight streamed through the old oak trees, scattering glittering patches of light across the wide garden lawn. Amara stood on the front porch, eyes anxiously following her 5-year-old son, Micah, as he darted between flower beds. His brown skin glowed in the morning light, curly hair bouncing with each step, and his wide, shining eyes seemed completely oblivious to the grandeur of the estate. To Micah, the garden wasn't a symbol of wealth, it was just a new playground, full of butterflies to chase and pebbles that sparkled under the sun. Amara hadn't planned to bring Micah with her that day. She always tried to keep her personal life separate from work, especially in a place like Elliot Carrington's home, where everything carried an air of cold order. But that morning, her usual sitter had called in sick, and Amara had no choice. She'd asked for permission from Harold, the housekeeper, who merely shrugged and said, "Let the boy stay outside. Just don't let him bother the boss." Amara nodded, though her chest remained tight. She knew Elliot didn't like disruptions, and the presence of a child might easily cross a line. Micah, blissfully unaware of his mother's worries, ran across the lawn with a bright grin, holding a stick like it was a knight's sword. His pure laughter rang out through the quiet estate, blending with bird song and softening the stillness that had long gripped the place. From the porch, Amara folded napkins with one hand and kept a watchful eye on him, ready to call him back if he wandered too far. Up on the second-floor balcony, Elliot stood silently, his left arm still in its sling, watching the boy. He'd heard the laughter from his study, a sound so foreign in this house of echoing footsteps and silent rain. Curious, he'd stepped outside, and now he couldn't look away. Micah jumped across the stepping stones, tumbled slightly, then stood back up, brushing off his knees with a carefree smile. There was something in the boy's presence so open, so fearless, that struck Elliot as strangely familiar. Like seeing a long-forgotten version of himself from a time before ambition, before loss, when life had still felt simple. Amara noticed Elliot on the balcony, and her heart clenched. "Micah, come back here. Don't go too far," she called, her voice a careful mix of worry and gentleness. But Micah, crouched over something on the ground, didn't hear her. Instead, he looked up and locked eyes with Elliot. Unlike most adults who approach the billionaire with stiffness or deference, Micah beamed and waved as if greeting an old friend. "Hi, mister," he called, his clear voice echoing across the lawn. Elliot froze. He didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to children, especially ones so unafraid. But before he could step back, Micah was already hurrying to the base of the balcony, his small feet rustling the grass. The boy stopped and looked up, holding something that sparkled in the sunlight. "Look!" Micah shouted, excitement bubbling in his voice. "I found a really cool rock." Amara rushed over, reaching to pull him away. "Micah, don't bother him," she said softly, her voice tight with apology. But Elliot, to his own surprise, held up a hand. "It's fine, he said, voice low but no longer cold. He looked down at Micah, and for the first time in days his eyes softened. "What kind of rock, kid?" Micah grinned and climbed the outdoor steps to the balcony before Amara could stop him. When he reached the top, Elliot got a closer look. The boy held out a small stone, no bigger than a coin, smooth and shaped roughly like a heart. It glinted in the sunlight as Micah raised it high. "I found it under that big tree," Micah explained, pointing toward a gnarled old oak. "I used to keep a rock like this under my pillow when Mom worked late. But now," he paused, offering the stone with both hands, "you can have it. It'll help you feel happy." Elliot took the stone, his fingers trembling slightly as they brushed its warm surface. It was worthless in the material sense, just a bit of polished gravel that could be found anywhere. But the way Micah looked at him, with pure, unquestioning sincerity, made it feel like a treasure. For the first time in his life, Elliot had been given something without strings attached, not for favor, not for profit, but simply because a 5-year-old believed he needed it. He stared at the stone, then at the boy, his throat tightening. "Thank you, kid," he said quietly, almost a whisper. He curled his fingers around the little heart-shaped rock, feeling its light weight pressed down on him as if it carried an entire forgotten world. At the foot of the stairs, Amara watched the scene, stunned. She had never seen Elliot like this, no arrogance, no coldness, just a man trying to grasp the meaning of a moment. She stepped up to the balcony, placing a hand gently on Micah's shoulder. "All right, sweetheart, let's let Mr. Carrington rest," she said softly, her gaze brushing Elliot's face with a hint of empathy. Elliot looked at Amara, standing only a few steps away, sunlight touching the edges of her curly hair. He wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. So instead, he just nodded, his eyes lingering on her longer than usual. His heart felt like it was melting, not from romance, but from a warmth he hadn't realized he'd been missing. The warmth that mother and son seemed to carry with them wherever they went. Micah, oblivious to the shift in the air, tugged at Amara's hand. "Mom, can I go find another cool rock?" he asked excitedly, already turning back toward the grass. Amara smiled, apologetic. "He's a handful, sir. I'll make sure he doesn't bother you again." "No need," Elliot said, voice softer than she'd ever heard. He opened his palm, looking down at the little heart-shaped stone. "He's something special." Then after a pause, he added, "Like his mother." Amara blushed, unsure how to respond. She lowered her head and turned away, but her heart beat faster. As she stepped off the balcony to follow Micah, she didn't know that Elliot was still standing there, holding the stone tightly in his hand, eyes following her and the boy across the garden. And in that moment, Elliot realized something he hadn't allowed himself to believe in a long time. Some people really could make him believe in something pure again, and the small, heart-shaped stone was proof of that. On Wednesday afternoon, golden orange light from the setting sun softened the cold, austere edges of the Carrington estate. The usual chill of stone and glass seemed gentler beneath the warm glow. In the small staff kitchen, Amara stood over the stove, stirring a pot of tomato soup. The air was fragrant with basil and cream. She had just returned from the hospital with Micah. What she didn't know was that, in the study just a few hallways away, Elliot Carrington was making an unexpected decision, one that would shift the rhythm of life for all three of them. Elliot stepped into the kitchen, looking slightly awkward in a plain gray shirt, his left arm still cradled in a sling. Amara startled, setting down the wooden spoon and wiping her hands on her apron. "Sir, do you need something?" she asked, her tone professional, though tinged with surprise. Elliot rarely entered the staff area, and today his gaze held something unfamiliar, not his usual chill or sharpness, but a kind of hesitation, like a man stepping into unfamiliar territory. "I'd like to invite you and Micah to dinner," he said, his voice low but steady. "Nothing formal, just a meal, here in the kitchen." He motioned toward the small wooden table in the corner, where staff usually ate. "If you don't mind," he added. Amara blinked, unsure she'd heard him right. Elliot, the same man who once barely looked at her, was now inviting her and her son to dinner. She opened her mouth, instinctively ready to decline, but then she saw his eyes not commanding, not patronizing, but sincere, almost vulnerable. "All right, sir," she said, offering a faint smile. "I'll call Micah. He's playing outside." An hour later, the modest kitchen had transformed into a quiet, intimate setting the estate had never known. The table was covered with a simple white cloth, the tomato soup still steamed in its pot, a plate of crisp toast sat nearby, and a glass pitcher of fresh lemonade stood at the center. Micah sat between them, legs swinging under his chair, his eyes wide with delight as he eyed the toast. Amara sat across from Elliot, who, perhaps for the first time in his life, was eating at a table not prepped by private chefs. He held his spoon with slight awkwardness, but his eyes remained on Amara and her son. Micah, without the slightest hesitation, began to chatter with the excitement only a 5-year-old could carry. "Today our teacher told us to draw superheroes," he said, arms flying as he mimicked the drawing. "I drew one who can fly like you, 'cause Mom said you used to be in a helicopter." He beamed at Elliot, unaware that his innocent words had brushed against an unhealed wound. Elliot froze, his spoon suspended midair. But then he smiled a small, rare smile that caught Amara off guard. "Flying's fun, kid," he said softly. "But next time, give your superhero a parachute, just in case." Micah burst into laughter, nodding enthusiastically, and Amara laughed too, her smile brightening the entire room. She refilled Micah's bowl and stole a glance at Elliot. He was eating slowly, as if he were savoring more than just the taste savoring the moment. For the first time since she'd stepped foot in this mansion, Elliot wasn't a stone figure, he was present, fully and genuinely, in a simple shared meal. As Micah told a story about dropping his pencil in class and everyone helping him find it, Elliot suddenly spoke, his voice distant and low. "My mother used to tell me stories like that," he said, eyes fixed on his bowl, as if seeing something far beyond it. "She was the only one who ever loved me without asking for anything. When I was little, she'd sit with me in the kitchen, talk about her days sewing in a factory. She said small things, a smile, a thank you were worth more than anything in the world." He paused, fingers tightening around his spoon. "She died when I was 15. No one ever sat with me just to talk after that." The room fell into silence, broken only by the clink of Micah's spoon. Amara looked at Elliot, her chest heavy. She wanted to say something, anything, but knew no words could erase that kind of pain. Instead, she quietly refilled his soup bowl, then gently laid her hand on Micah's shoulder, brushing his curls in a silent gesture of love and comfort, as if reminding both of them that warmth still existed. Elliot looked up and caught her gaze. That small gesture, her hand on her son's shoulder, her quiet kindness stilled him. He realized how deeply he longed for that warmth, that sense of home money could never buy. He thought of Clara, his fiancée, always arriving with flawless smiles and meticulous plans. "Clara," he said, almost to himself, "she wanted me to sign that paper because she thought I couldn't protect myself anymore. Maybe she was right, but she never sat with me. Not just to sit, like this." Amara didn't answer. She didn't need to. She simply smiled gently, poured more lemonade for Micah, and kept listening to his superhero tale. But deep down, she knew this moment mattered. She could feel it, something inside Elliot was shifting. A door once locked tight was beginning to open. Not just in his heart, but in hers too. She didn't know where it would lead, but in this little kitchen, surrounded by laughter and silence, they had all found something they needed: connection. The meal ended with Micah yawning wide, eyelids heavy with sleep. Amara stood to clear the table, but Elliot raised his hand. "I've got it," he said softly but firmly. He took his bowl to the sink, his movements clumsy thanks to his injury, yet filled with surprising care. Amara watched, smiling. For the first time, she didn't just see a billionaire. She saw a man learning to open himself up. Later, as Amara and Micah left the estate, Elliot stood at the study window, watching their old car disappear into the night. In his hand, he clutched the heart-shaped stone Micah had given him, its smooth surface still warm from his palm. And for the first time in years, he felt peace not from power or possessions, but from a simple dinner, a genuine smile. And he knew, if only for a moment, that this, whatever it was worth more than everything he had ever owned. In the days following the quiet dinner in the staff kitchen, the Carrington estate seemed to breathe differently, if only in small, barely noticeable ways. Elliot no longer confined himself to the study all day. Occasionally, he walked the halls and asked Amara about her work, her mother's condition, or why Micah hadn't been by lately. Sometimes he even paused to listen as the boy told an aimless story, laughing in that pure, unfiltered way only a child could. But that fragile warmth didn't last long. Clara, with the instincts of someone who had always been in control, sensed the shift in her power. And Clara Langley was not the kind of woman who surrendered her position without a fight. She returned to the estate on a bright Thursday morning. Elliot was in the living room reviewing company documents when she swept in, immaculate as ever in a fitted white suit, her golden hair tied high, her lips stretched into a smile that was as sharp as it was cold. Amara, dusting in the corner, felt the change in atmosphere the moment Clara entered. She didn't even look at Amara, but her gaze sliced across the room like a blade, calculated and intentional. "Elliot, we need to talk," Clara said, her voice sweet but heavy with pressure. She sat across from him, placing a sleek black leather briefcase on the table. "About the company and the rumors." Elliot looked up, eyebrows narrowing slightly. "Rumors?" His voice was low, skeptical, but open to listening. After the incident with the power of attorney, his trust in Clara had fractured, but she was still his fiancée, still entangled in the world of power he had built. Clara tilted her head, the smile never leaving her face. People are saying you're being influenced by the wrong kinds of people, that you're letting your emotions cloud your judgment, especially after the accident. The board is concerned, Elliot. They think you need time to recover, to protect Carrington Technologies' image. Amara froze mid-movement, hands tightening around her cloth. She didn't look up, but she knew Clara's words were pointed, deliberate. She was the target. Elliot set the papers down, his expression sharpening. "Who are you referring to, Clara?" Clara shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "I'm not here to point fingers, darling. But your housemate Amara, is it? She seems a little too close. People talk. A single mother, hospital debt, working under your roof. You know how easily that can be spun." Her words, sugar-coated and poisonous, hit like a blow. Amara's face flushed hot, but she kept her silence, hands trembling slightly as she resumed wiping the shelf. If she spoke now, she'd only play into Clara's narrative. "Enough," Elliot said sharply. "Amara has nothing to do with this. If the board has concerns, they can come to me directly." Clara stood, smoothing her skirt, her smile never breaking, though her eyes flickered with something colder. "Of course, Elliot. I just want what's best for you. Your image is the company's image." She turned and walked out, her heels clicking briskly against the marble floor. But Amara knew this wasn't the end. Clara Langley didn't quit when she was losing. Over the following days, the storm began. Clara's rumors spread like wildfire. Tabloids ran sensational headlines. Is billionaire Elliot Carrington being manipulated by his maid? Carrington Technologies faces crisis amid leadership scandal. The board, already uneasy about Elliot's health post-accident, began to tighten the pressure. In an emergency video meeting, they pushed for his temporary resignation as CEO, at least until the allegations were clarified. Some even suggested a background check on Amara, as if she posed a legitimate threat. Elliot sat in his office, staring at the faces on the large screen, stern, cautious, political. Anger rose in him like a flame. "You're telling me I'm not stable enough to run the company I built?" he snapped. "All because of baseless gossip? Amara has done nothing but her job. If anyone needs investigating, start with the people spreading these lies." But the pressure was relentless, and Elliot, despite his fury, knew that waging war with the board now could tear the company apart. He reluctantly agreed to step back, not because he believed the lies, but because he needed time. Time to dismantle whatever Clara had set in motion. That afternoon, Amara walked into the study, where Elliot sat nursing a cold cup of coffee. Her hands were clasped tightly, her gaze steady but tinged with sorrow. "Sir," she said softly, "I'd like to resign." Elliot's head snapped up, eyes flashing with shock and something dangerously close to panic. "What did you say?" He stood, movement stiff from his injury. "Why?" Amara took a deep breath, keeping her voice calm. "I don't want to be the reason you have to defend yourself." Her words were gentle, but resolute. "These rumors, they're not just about me. They're hurting you, hurting your company. I'm just a maid, sir. I'm not worth this." Elliot stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "You're not the reason. Clara and the board, they're trying to control me. You saved me once, Amara. Don't think for a second I'm going to let you walk away because of their games." But Amara shook her head. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she held her ground. "I don't want Micah growing up in a world where his mother is seen as a parasite," she said. "I need to protect him, sir. And right now, the only way I can do that is by leaving." She lowered her eyes, placed the resignation letter on the desk, and turned away each step carrying a part of her heart. Elliot stood frozen in the study, watching the door close behind her. The mansion suddenly felt colder than it ever had. He reached into his pocket, fingers closing around the heart-shaped stone Micah had given him. Its warmth no longer comforted, it hurt. Amara had been more than a maid. She had been his reminder that good still existed. And now, because of Clara's schemes, he had let her go. But deep down, Elliot knew this wasn't the end, not for him, and not for Amara. top of form, bottom of form. In the days after Amara's departure, the Carrington estate became a hollow shell. The marble halls, the lavishly furnished rooms, all sat in suffocating silence. Elliot remained in the study, staring blankly at the heart-shaped stone Micah had given him. Her absence wasn't just the loss of a housemaid. It had unearthed something buried deep within him, the ache of needing someone real, someone who spoke not to his status, but to his soul. But before he could find Amara, Elliot knew he had to confront Clara and the damage she had done. He had never loved Clara, not in the way that word should mean. She had always been a perfect accessory to his image. Beautiful, brilliant, polished, a high-powered attorney who shone at charity galas and knew how to handle a press camera. Their engagement was a transaction, a strategic alignment meant to fortify his position in the world of influence and control. But after the power of attorney betrayal, the trust between them fractured. And when Amara was driven away by Clara's poisonous whispers, that fracture became a wound that could never be mended. Elliot hired a team of private investigators, discreet professionals with a reputation for results. Within days, they returned with a thick dossier documenting Clara's dealings during his hospitalization. She had quietly diverted large sums from Carrington Technologies' investment accounts into offshore havens, masked as legal consultation fees. She had maintained regular contact with a faction of the board members, long discontent with Elliot's autocratic leadership. But none of that is what enraged him most. Money could be recovered, power could be reclaimed. What he could never forgive was her calculated campaign to destroy Amara's name, spreading lies through the press, manipulating the board, and leveraging Elliot's accident to push him out of his own empire. Amara, who had only ever told him the truth. Amara, who had saved him from signing away his life. That was unforgivable. Elliot called an emergency board meeting at Carrington Technologies' glass-clad downtown headquarters. In a sweeping corner room with skyline views, he stood before the board left arm still in a sling, but eyes razor sharp. He didn't sit. He didn't read from notes. His voice was cold, controlled. Clara Langley manipulated this company while I was recovering, he began, his words dropping like hammer blows. She funneled money into offshore accounts, colluded with some of you to orchestrate my removal, and smeared the reputation of an innocent woman, Amara Reed, who saved me from signing away control of this empire to a woman who saw me as nothing but a means to power. He threw the dossier onto the conference table. Pages fanned out like a storm, faces on the board paling as they scanned them. This is your proof. If you care about the integrity of this company, start by removing those who betrayed it. The room was silent but for the heavy breathing of a few board members. Some lowered their eyes. Others whispered among themselves, scrambling for excuses. But Elliot gave them no room to maneuver. He turned to the company's head of communications. By tomorrow morning, I want every major publication to run the story. Clara Langley's name will no longer be tied to Carrington Technologies. And our engagement? His voice sharpened. Consider it terminated. The news broke like a tidal wave. From gossip blogs to financial giants, every outlet ran headlines exposing Clara's misconduct. She was swiftly removed from the board, investigated for financial fraud, and her shining legal career collapsed overnight. She disappeared from the spotlight in disgrace, her name now a cautionary tale of greed and ambition. But for Elliot, victory felt hollow. He sat alone in his office high above the city, watching the rain blur the glittering lights. He had reclaimed control. He had burned away the shadow Clara had cast. Yet the only thing that filled his mind was Amara. She hadn't left out of shame or guilt. She had left to protect him, to protect her son. And now, for the first time in his life, Elliot realized he couldn't bear to lose someone like her. The next morning, a steady rain fell across the city. Elliot drove himself no security detail, no assistant to Micah's preschool, a humble yellow building on the city's edge. He stood beneath an oak tree outside, the branches barely shielding him as rain soaked through his coat. He waited. Parents came and went, umbrellas bobbing, children chattering. Then he saw her Amara walking toward the gate, her stride steady but tired, like someone carrying the weight of the world. Micah ran to her, arms around her legs, beaming. Amara smiled faintly, but her eyes were heavy. Elliot stepped from the shadows, rain streaming down his face. She looked up and froze. Her umbrella tilted, letting rain fall onto her hair. "Sir, what are you doing here?" she asked softly, her voice trembling not from the cold, but from the shock. Elliot stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. His voice was hoarse. "You saved me, Amara," he said, "not just from signing that paper, from my entire life. Clara's gone. The rumors have stopped, but I don't care about any of that." He swallowed hard. "I just want you back, not as an employee. I don't want to live in a world where you're not in it." Amara stood still, raindrops clinging to her lashes. She didn't cry, but her gaze ached. She looked at him, at the man he was now, and saw the truth in his eyes. Micah looked up between them, sensing something he couldn't name. "Mom," he said, tugging her coat, "he's all wet." The innocence in his voice broke the silence, and for a moment both adults smiled. But in their hearts, something else stirred. Something heavier. Something real. And Elliot knew this was just the beginning. Elliot, his black coat soaked and clinging to his shoulders, took another step toward Amara, his gaze fixed on her without wavering for even a second. Rain streamed down his face, blurring his sharp features, but his voice remained clear, hoarse from emotion. "Amara," he continued, picking up where his words had been interrupted by Micah's innocent call, "I used to think people came to me for money, for power, for the things I had. But you came because I was about to make a mistake. You didn't want anything from me, and yet you gave me something I didn't know I needed: truth and hope." He paused, taking a deep breath, as if searching for the courage to say what he had never said to anyone before. "I don't know what love is," he admitted, his voice lower now, almost a whisper, yet strong enough to rise above the rain. "I've never learned it, not in the real way. But if I could learn, if I could start over, I'd want to learn from you." His words were like a gentle knife, not painful, but enough to make Amara's heart tremble. She felt the tears spill, hot on her cheeks, mingling with the cold raindrops. She didn't wipe them away. She didn't hide them. She simply stood there looking at him, the man who had once been a wall of ice, now revealing his vulnerability with heartbreaking honesty. She wanted to say something: "Thank you, I'm sorry," maybe even no, but her throat tightened, and all she could manage was a small nod, barely noticeable unless one looked closely. Micah, standing between them, looked up at his mother, then at Elliot. He didn't understand all the words that had just been said, but his innocent smile never faded. He let go of Amara's hand and, without warning, took Elliot's hand instead, his small fingers gripping the man's much larger ones tightly. "Mister, don't stand in the rain," Micah said in his clear little voice, tugging on both their hands as if trying to pull them together. "You'll get sick." The child's simple act broke the tension, and Amara let out a soft laugh, even as the tears still streamed down her cheeks. Elliot crouched slightly, looking at Micah, and for the first time he smiled, not a polite smile, not a forced one, but a genuine smile that lit up his face. "Thanks, kid," he said, gently brushing back the boy's curly hair. Then he stood, meeting Amara's eyes again, his gaze tender but unwavering. "I'm not asking you to answer right now. I just want you to know I'm serious. I'll wait, Amara, as long as it takes." Amara took a deep breath, her umbrella tilting slightly as she stepped closer, just enough for the rain to land on her shoulder. "I don't know what I can offer you, sir," she said, her voice trembling, but sincere. "My life. It's not simple. Micah, my mother, everything I carry. I'm not sure I can be the person you think I am." She looked down at Micah, then back at him. "But I feel your sincerity, and that means something to me." Elliot nodded, no pressure, no expectations. He understood that Amara wasn't someone who opened her heart easily, not because she didn't want to, but because she'd learned to protect it, to protect the little boy standing beside her. "I'll show you that you can trust me," he said, voice low but steady. "Not with money, not with words, with time." Micah, growing restless, tugged harder on both their hands. "Mom, mister, let's go under the roof. You're all wet already." He skipped ahead, leading them to a covered area near the school gate where other parents were waiting. Amara and Elliot followed, their hands still held in Micah's, an invisible thread drawing them together. Under the awning, the rain no longer touched them, though the air was still heavy with the scent of earth and wet leaves. Amara looked at Elliot, and for the first time, she didn't call him sir. "Elliot," she said softly, "thank you for coming, for not giving up." He smiled a small but warm smile. "Thank you for giving me a reason to keep trying." They stood there beneath the awning, with Micah between them, the rain continuing to fall in a steady rhythm like a gentle soundtrack. No promises were made, no vows exchanged, but there was a quiet understanding, an unspoken beginning. Amara wiped her tears, holding Micah's hand tighter, and for the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she could let someone step into her small, guarded world. And Elliot, looking at the mother and child before him, knew he had found what he'd been searching for his entire life. Not power, not wealth, but a heart worth learning to love. You're watching Soul Stories exclusive to our channel. If you're still with us, drop a comment. We read and cherish them all. Subscribe to support more heartfelt, original stories. Thanks for being part of the Soul Stories family. In the months following that moment beneath the oak tree, Elliot Carrington was no longer the man the world had once known. The helicopter crash, Clara's schemes, and Amara's presence had changed him at his core. He made a full recovery, not just physically, with full mobility returning to his left arm, and the pain slowly fading, but emotionally as well. He was no longer the cold CEO obsessed with power and numbers. Instead, he became someone new, more open, compassionate, and full of life, leaving the staff at Carrington Technologies in stunned awe. Elliot scaled back his responsibilities at the company, delegating many tasks to his vice presidents and management team. He still made key decisions, but no longer confined himself to the office from dawn till night. His longtime assistant, Sarah, a sharp middle-aged woman, once teased him in a meeting, "After that crash, it's like we have a brand new CEO. I'm not sure whether to thank the helicopter or whoever turned you around." She winked, and Elliot only smiled, a relaxed smile no one had seen from him before. His time now went to things he'd never imagined himself valuing. Each morning, he drove a modest black SUV, not the flashy Bentley anymore, to drop Micah off at school. The little boy sat in the back seat, rambling about friends or crayon drawings, and Elliot listened, sometimes chuckling, when Micah declared he wanted to become a flying superhero like you. In the afternoons, they shot hoops in the backyard or built spaceship models out of Legos, their laughter echoing through a home that had once known only silence. Elliot also visited St. Mary's Hospital often, where Amara's mother, Grace, was slowly recovering from her stroke. She had awakened after months in a coma, a miracle Amara called a gift from heaven. Elliot sat with her, sharing stories about Micah, the company, or simply holding her hand in silence when Amara had to work. He learned how to listen, how to care not just for Amara's family, but for everyone around him. He began checking in with his employees, from security guards to engineers, asking about their lives, their struggles. Once, he even established a scholarship fund for employees' children, something he once would have considered unnecessary. To Amara, Elliot's transformation felt nothing short of miraculous. For the first time in years, she didn't have to fight life alone. She no longer juggled two jobs, worried about hospital bills or Micah's future. Elliot became someone she could lean on, not because he had money, but because he was truly there, with patience and sincerity. When she was exhausted, he brewed coffee and sat with her in the kitchen, saying nothing as she rested her head on his shoulder. When she fretted about her mother, he held her hand and said, "We'll get through it, together." Amara, who once believed she had to be strong all by herself, learned how to share the weight, and for the first time, felt relief in doing so. Micah was the happiest of them all. He adored Elliot, called him Uncle L, and constantly asked for bedtime stories. Each night, in the small apartment Amara and Micah rented near the Carrington estate, Elliot sat beside the boy's bed, reading picture books about astronauts and superheroes. Amara sat nearby, sometimes knitting, sometimes simply listening to Elliot's deep, calm voice. Her quiet presence, even without words, gave him peace, as if all the storms of the past had finally calmed. One spring morning, soft sunlight filtered into the estate's cozy kitchen, where Amara was cooking porridge for Micah. The bubbling of the pot blended with the boy's laughter as he colored with wax crayons at the table. Elliot entered, wearing a pale blue shirt and holding a white envelope. He placed it in front of Amara, eyes glowing with a subtle excitement. "Open it," he said, his voice light but full of meaning. Amara wiped her hands on her apron, curious, and opened the envelope. Inside was an application to resume her law studies at her old university and an official acceptance letter. She looked up, eyes wide with disbelief. "Elliot, this is—" "I can't change the past," Elliot said, stepping closer, his gaze gentle but firm. "I can't erase the years you gave up on your dream, but I can open the door to your future. I reached out to the school. They're ready to welcome you back. I'll take care of Micah while you study. We'll take care of Grace together. You deserve this, Amara." Tears shimmered in Amara's eyes, not from sorrow, but from a happiness she had never dared to hope for. She smiled, set the papers down, and wrapped her arms around Elliot, sinking into his warmth. "Thank you," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for believing in me." Micah, witnessing it all, leapt from his chair and hugged both of them, laughing loudly. "Mommy's going back to school? I want to go too." His giggles filled the kitchen, making it warmer than ever. 2 years later, Amara completed her law program, passing every exam with determination and Elliot's unwavering support. On her graduation day, beneath the brilliant sun of a summer afternoon, she stepped onto the stage in her cap and gown, beaming as she looked down at the crowd where Elliot and Micah cheered nonstop. Grace, now healthier than ever, sat beside them, eyes gleaming with pride. After the ceremony in the university's garden where roses bloomed in full color, Elliot led Amara and Micah to a quiet corner. He knelt down, startling Amara, and opened a small box, revealing a simple but elegant ring that sparkled in the sunlight. "Amara Reed," he said, voice trembling with emotion, "you taught me what it means to live. I want to spend the rest of my life learning more from you, being by your side and Micah's. Will you marry me?" Amara burst into tears this time, tears of overwhelming joy. She nodded, unable to speak, and Elliot slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into an embrace. Micah jumped up and down, yelling, "Mom's marrying Uncle L. I want to be the ring bearer." All three laughed, and the garden filled with applause from those who witnessed a moment that felt like magic. Later, Amara became a volunteer lawyer for an organization supporting single mothers, helping women like she once was find their second chance. Elliot remained a part of Carrington Technologies, but spent more time at home taking Micah to school in the mornings, shooting hoops in the afternoons, and reading by Amara's side in the evenings. A miracle had happened not just in Amara's life, but in Elliot's heart, where love and hope had become a fire that would never burn out.